Hi everyone, Raymond here from Just-ok-wargamers. I haven't made a video in a number of years, and I thought I would start back up making videos now I have a little bit of free time. And the videos I thought I'd make would be some review videos of different wargaming rules that I use and play around with. I primarily play fantasy rank and flank games, but I also do some historical stuff with Ancients and World War II. What I thought I'd do is I'd make some review videos of different games, and then I'd also do a how to play as well. And I thought I'd start out with looking at Oathmark, Battles of the Lost Age. And I want to do this because Osprey just came out and said that they're going to actually release a second edition of Oathmark sometime in 2026, which is really exciting. So in this video, I'll look at the first edition of Oathmark and I will review it. And then I can also look at some ideas of what they could hopefully be putting into the second edition. So let's get into the review process. So the style of review I'm going to do today is going to be similar to what is done on Little War TV. I'm going to split into 5 categories. So presentation, playability, the mechanics, the flavor, and what support there is available for Oathmark. I'll mark each category out of 10, and then we'll end up with a total score out of 50 of the rules themselves. I'll start off with a little bit of introduction into what Oathmark is. Then I'll go through each of the categories, and then we'll have a little overview, and then a separate video where I'll do a playthrough with 2 small armies so people can see the mechanics in the game working. So let's start off with a little introduction. So a little introduction to Oathmark. Oathmark Battles of the Lost Age is by Joseph McCullough. He also makes games like Frostgrave, or you may have seen Silver Bayonet. And it's published by Osprey. Generally, the game is played with 28mm models, and it's a fantasy rank and flank game. So that means that your units are going to be, your miniatures we put into units, and they'll move around the board in bodies of 5 to 20 men. In terms of playing area, normally it's going to be played on a 6x4 foot board, though it could be played on smaller, something like 4x4 foot would also work out for a smaller game. You're normally going to need around 80 figures to make a smallish army of kind of 4 to 5 units, but a regular size game is probably going to be closer to 200 figures to make your army up, and it's going to be split into, a dozen or so units. It is reminiscent of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, though the rules are much more simplified. Within your army, your mainstay is going to be infantry models with some cavalry, and there could potentially be some ogre-sized models, as well as monsters such as a dragon. And there's also going to be artillery pieces, and then of course your characters, which could be mighty warriors, or they could be wizards who are going to be using spells. The game is roughly 2 hours to be played through, though of course if the bigger your armies are, the longer it's going to take. We'll look into the mechanics of the games later on, but let's start off with the first category, which is presentation. All right, so let's look at presentation. So Oathmark Battle of the Lost Age. First thing to note is it is a hardback book, which is really, really nice. It means it's really durable. Generally, when you open it up, the pages will kind of stay where you open it. That makes it a lot easier to use than like a soft cover book, and a lot more durable. The artwork on the cover and throughout the book is amazing, I would say. It definitely adds to the flavor of the rules, and the artwork is really, really consistent with, I guess, like the Tolkien-esque vibe that they're going with Oathmark Battle of the Lost Age. So aesthetically, the presentation is amazing. And if we have a quick little flip through, straight away you can see throughout there are these really nice ink drawings throughout the entire book, just like, little bits of armor and artwork throughout, which is really, really good looking. There's also throughout some flavor texts, and there's lots of photography with the miniatures and different terrain which they've been making, which looks really, really nice. Every few pages, you have these kind of like full pieces of artwork throughout, and quite often those pieces are going to be a double piece where it's going to take up both pages, which is excellent. So aesthetically, the presentation is beautiful. When we look at the practicality of the presentation, we do have a content page, which is really useful. And if you look at it, the actual rules themselves only take up a little over 60 pages, which is really not that many when you compare it to, say, a game like Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Though the content page is really good, what it is lacking is a index, which is, for me, a big problem with wargaming rules, is when they don't have an index. It can be really tricky when you're trying to find a particular rule, trying to find an answer for it. The other thing it lacks is a quick reference sheet. It'd be really useful if the book had a quick reference sheet at the back, which you could just have as a reference really quickly just to go to, or you could then photocopy it and have it as a separate piece. There is quick reference sheets out there. They're just on like a Facebook page or something instead. I would have liked it to be in the book itself. Would have been really nice. So there's a couple of things lacking there. In terms of the presentation of the rules, the rules themselves are not super complicated. I do find that they're a little bit text heavy sometimes for how simple the rules can be. It would be nice if they had, the text heavy version, and then underneath, maybe in like a highlighted box, if they had just a simplified version of that rule. So you could just skip to that and go, yep, that rule makes sense, and then move on. And if you felt like you needed more clarity, then you could read the more text-heavy version of the rules. We do find throughout that there is diagrams as well. And obviously diagrams can be really useful, giving some examples. And then they give examples of plays through text as well. There's one of the double artwork and double page artwork pieces which they have throughout the book. And so the presentation of the rules is okay, though you can see here when it's going through characters just how heavy the text can be, where sometimes you want to just search and find the main point of that rule. So I think that could be improved. They do have some diagrams for things such as movement, but the diagrams themselves take up quite a bit of space. Like this one diagram showing a wheel takes up 2/3 of the page. I think these diagrams could be smaller, and then they could have more diagrams, maybe showing some of the more complex situations that can arise. Sometimes you have issues in the rules where it might give you a simple action, and then you look at simple actions and you want to know about they can still shoot, but they count as moving. But then you've got to go to the shooting page to find out what effect that actually has. And I feel like that they could have avoided that. That means I need to flip through over to shooting. They could have just said that they're going to have -1 to shoot. A few extra words which they have space for there, and then I don't need to look at simple actions and then go over to shooting. I can just look at simple actions instead. So overall, the aesthetics presentation, I would say, is amazing. The practicality of the presentation of how the rules are laid out has a few different things to work with. So an index page and a quick reference sheet, and then maybe tiny boxes underneath the main rules, just explaining them a little bit quicker. They're my only gripes. So out of 10, I'd be looking at a 7 out of 10 for the presentation of Oathmark. If we're looking just at the aesthetics, it would be an easy 10 out of 10 because it is a beautiful book. So let's move on and we'll look at the playability of the rules next. Let's have a quick talk about the playability of the rules. I think this particular rule set has really good playability. The rules themselves compared to a game like Warhammer Fantasy Battles are much more simple. So if you're experienced at rank and flank fantasy games, you will have no trouble picking this up. Movement is much simpler, combat is much simpler. If you are brand new to wargaming, it might take you one game to play through, and then after that, I would imagine that you won't be making too many mistakes at all. The other thing which makes it have good playability is its alternating activation. So I activate a unit and do what I want with it, and then my opponent will activate a unit. So it's got a really quick turnaround with your engagement. So you won't be waiting, 20, 30 minutes for your opponent to have their turn, and you're just watching them do everything. You get to react all the time, which is really, really nice. The other thing which gives it good playability is everything you need is in the one book. So it has all the rules, and then it has your army lists. So you don't need to buy a separate army book. It'll have all your humans, dwarves, elves, orcs, and goblins in here. And it's got all your spells and magic items and several scenarios to play through as well. You can get expansion books, which is what I have here. I'll do a review of the expansion books separately, but they're just optional extras, which just add a bit more flavor to it, which is really nice. So really solid playability. I'd be giving it at least an 8 out of 10 for playability, and I'd just mark it down a little bit just because of some of those issues that we talked about in the presentation. So the only thing which makes it down a little bit in the playability is that sometimes it might be tricky to find specific rules, like what is the effect of shooting when you're doing it as a simple action. You need to flip back and forth through the rulebook to try to find that, and there's no quick reference sheet. Okay, so really good playability wise. So let's talk about the mechanics of Oathmark, because they're really, really interesting. One of the big differences with Oathmark compared to a more traditional rank and flank fantasy style game like Warhammer is that it uses a alternating activation system. So you set your armies up on your board facing one another, and then when you start a turn, you will roll some dice, and the system uses D10, which is another big difference, than a regular D6. And you'll figure out who's going to get the first activation. But from there, you alternate activating units. So instead of your opponent getting to move their entire army, then shoot their entire army, and then do all their combats, and you're there watching them for 30 minutes, and then you get to do the same. Instead, you're going to be them activating one of their units, and they might activate these beastmen and do something, and then I'll get to do something, and I'll get to activate one of my units, like these Skaven slingers, and then do something with them. This makes for a really interesting mechanic, because what will end up happening is when you start your turn, you have your whole army played out before you, but you will then need to prioritize which units to activate first. It could be it's my turn to activate, and I have this unit here set up nicely to take this unit of beastmen in the rear. And that could be very tempting, but perhaps on the other side of the battlefield, I'll have a unit which is disordered and about to run away, and I could instead use that opportunity to activate them and rally them and save that unit. But then I've missed this opportunity because this unit of beastmen might activate next and react to me being in the rear. So straight away throughout the entire turn, you're always having to try to prioritize when to activate certain units. So that's one of the main big mechanics of Oathmark, is the alternating activation system. The other really interesting mechanic is that it uses a 10-sided dice instead of a traditional D6. This is really good because you can have more points of difference, obviously, within a 10-sided dice and a 6-sided dice. And this means that they've limited the amount of times you need to roll dice in Oathmark. So traditionally, I think a lot of people would be used to rolling, say, to hit, and then once I've hit something, they do another roll to wound a creature. Then maybe that creature gets to make a save of some kind. Sometimes it could be multiple layers of save. So you could be rolling a dice 4 times to then see the effect, and then you need to make a 6 roll to see the effect on the morale. In Oathmark, when you're doing combat or shooting, you're going to be rolling anywhere between 1 up to a maximum of 5 dice. That's it. That's the max. It's not big handfuls of D6s. It's a maximum of 5 dice that you roll. And when you roll them, they've combined the to hit, to wound, and an armor save roll all into the 1 dice roll. So that really speeds up gameplay very, very fast. Okay. So it's one of the other interesting mechanics. Lastly, the only other mechanic I really want to talk about before I get on to the movement is the activation mechanic. The activation mechanic is every unit will then, when it needs to activate, has to roll 2d10, and it's got to get over its activation score to fully activate. So a unit, say, of, let's say these are goblin slaves, are going to have a high activation roll. So I think for the slaves, it might be, say, an activation of 6. So when I roll a dice, one of the dice I'm looking for to be higher than a 6, and the unit will activate, and it will get to fully activate, and it'll be able to do a whole plethora of different things. It could be that I roll a 4 and a 2, and that doesn't meet, neither of those dice meet its activation roll, and so it'll only get to do a simple action, which will be something like it could move, or it could wheel, but it can't do both, and it won't be able to go into combat. This is a really good system because it means that you don't fully know when you activate a unit if it's going to be following the orders like how you want it. And this adds in a nice level of command and control and friction. Now, this can be mitigated by having commanders close by who might let you roll an extra dice, so you have more likelihood of activating them. And what we also see is that units such as elves, who are much more orderly, have a much lower activation roll. So elves are highly likely to activate all the time and be able to do exactly what they want, while unruly armies like goblins are going to have more frustration where they don't get to charge in, kind of like an animosity style rule. So that is another really interesting mechanic. Lastly, for mechanics, we'll look at some of the movement mechanics, because I think this is where, though the mechanics in Oathmark are really, really great, the movement is definitely what I think to be its biggest weakness. So when you activate a unit, if it gets to fully activate, it gets to have 2 movement actions. So that could be to move forward, however far it can, which, say for these beastmen might be 6 inches, and they could use its second action to move forward again. Okay, kind of like a march move. Instead, it could do a maneuver, so it could pivot on the spot, and it can just pivot as much as it wants, and that's 1 action, and they can use its second one to move forward. And then another maneuver could be to wheel, and you can wheel with 1 action as much as you want. You're not limited by your movement, and this is where we can see issues come in. So say we have a situation like this where these Skaven slave slingers have got to the rear of these beastmen, and you think that would be a really bad thing for the beastmen. They're going to be in a lot of trouble, and it might take them a while for them to maneuver out of trouble, okay, in a traditional rake and flank game. If it was Warhammer, say, they might just spend their whole turn to about face, okay, and then they've spent their whole time moving there, and they've been put at a big disadvantage. In Oathmark, however, the rules as written, as far as I can see, this unit can activate, and it can spend 1 of its actions to wheel, and there's no limit to how much I can wheel. So I'm going to keep on wheeling. I'm going to keep on wheeling, all the way around, like so. And then I stop, and then my second action, I'm going to move forward, and all of a sudden, I've got this flank charge on this unit that was at my rear a second ago. And for me, I don't know if that's the rules as intended, but for me, that loses a whole lot of immersion of a rank and flank game if my units can just wheel about kind of willy-nilly like and get a flank charge on a unit that was just at its rear. Now, I'm hoping in second edition that they'll correct this, and I think it can be easily fixed by, say, maybe limiting wheeling or pivoting to just a 90-degree wheel per action. So instead, I'd only wheel up to here for one action, and then if I did it a second time, I would get to this point here. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to get a flank charge on that unit. So because of some issues with what I think to be some issues with the maneuver mechanics of the game, I am going to mark it down a couple of points. And I think overall the mechanics, though, are really interesting, really fun, and really, really engaging. So I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 for the mechanics. Okay, so the next category is a little bit tricky because it is the flavor of the rules. If it was a historical rule set, you're kind of looking at how does it capture the Napoleonic period, or how does it capture platoon level World War II engagements. It's a bit harder with the fantasy settings, especially with Oathmark, because it does not have a traditional setting. It does seem to be inspired by Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, kind of Tolkien style settings, but it doesn't have one of itself. Okay, you're meant to be using the rule set as a sandbox, and you either make your own setting, or you can place it into, say, Lord of the Rings. Or you could do it as, put this in place of Warhammer, which is what I've done in the past. So it's a little bit tricky to assess the flavor that it has, but I would say that this rule set does have good flavor in terms of it does create a feeling of how I would envision a fantasy rank and flank battle. And it does make you create flavor for your own games by having systems like create a kingdom system where you have your different territories and you pick your territories and it gives you access to different units. And then it goes into further detail by looking at the expansions, which will then add in things like having your veteran units or legendary characters. It also looks at having political events within your kingdom, and you start making a bit of a kingdom timeline. So in that regards, it has really, really good flavor. It gives you all the tools that you need and all the support that you need to make your own kingdom and your own world. And that's what I really like about the Oathmark system. It doesn't necessarily give you the flavor like what you might get from like a Two Fat Lardies pint-sized campaign system, or some of the old 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle campaign books that you'd get, where you'd be given all the flavor. But it does give you everything you need to make your own. And that's almost more enjoyable because then you've made something which is really unique. So really hard for me to mark the flavor, but I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 for flavor, because it doesn't necessarily give you it, but it gives you everything you need to make your own. Okay, so let's talk about support for Oathmark. Interesting one, because Oathmark came out in 2020, right when COVID hit. So it probably didn't have the same impact that it could have if we didn't have everyone all of a sudden in isolation. Saying that, there is a very active Facebook page for Oathmark, which is excellent if you have questions. If you need to get a quick reference sheet, you can go to the file section. So that's a good starting place when you're looking for some support of getting to play your first few games. There is also a excellent YouTube channel called Ash and Stone, and he probably does some of the best battle reports that you'll see just on the internet, but he does a lot of solo Oathmark narrative games. So if you want to learn how to play the game, that's probably a really good starting place. He seems to be very, very active, producing a lot of content, which is excellent. Besides those two places, when you're looking for support for Oathmark, you also have 3 expansion books, and I might do a separate review of these later, but I can really quickly say that they're great. They include things like kingdom events, legendary units, includes all the undead as a new faction, and each one has about 10 scenarios for you to play through, and those scenarios are often linked together in like 3 to 4 scenario, I think they're called expeditions, but essentially it's like a mini campaign, and they are heaps of fun and really varied. You know, you have ones which has a whole bunch of ship landings on it. You have ones with a whole bunch of like stone colossus that come to life and will support you or support your opponent. And then you have a whole bunch of undead kind of themed ones, which are really great. So in terms of support, I'd be thinking a 6 out of 10 for support, only because there hasn't been anything released for Oathmark in the past 3 years. Saying that, they are very shortly, hopefully sometime this year, going to release a second edition of this. So let's wrap up and have a quick talk about what I'd be hoping to see in a second edition of Oathmark, and an overview of my thoughts of the game. So my last thoughts for Oathmark. So overall, a really good game. I think I've added up my scores and I'm looking at a 37 points out of a potential 50 points, which puts us up there with a highly recommend playing game, and is really good if you want to get new people into wargaming, because the mechanics are so simple and really engaging with that alternating activation. In terms of a second edition, if they were to bring out a second edition of this book, which I believe they are, hopefully sometime this year, what I'd like to really see is the quality of the presentation to be maintained, because the presentation is really beautiful. I would love to see the maneuver mechanics changed to make it more restrictive. I'd also love to see a mechanic put in place that really supported having a battle line, because I think often where these rank and flank games go wrong is it makes it too appealing to go with individual strong units like a dragon or a character, and then you lose what makes it a rank and flank mass battle system. I really want the primary strength of my units to be the infantry forming up a strong battle line, supporting one another, and the characters are adding in support, or the monsters are adding in some type of heavy hitting power to the army, but they can't just go in solo. They need the support of the massed ranks. So incorporating some type of system where the units, if they're in a battle line, are supporting one another, maybe with some kind of saves, would be really good. Other really small tweaks for second edition would be to do something with the elves. The elves in this game are very expensive, and they do activate really well, but there's no difference really in the defense capabilities of an elf compared to a goblin. I think a really easy way to fix that would be to do something like have all the elves units count as having a level of shielding or something, which would just make them a little bit more durable, without just doing something like adding up their defense value. Instead, it would be a good representation of them being a bit more agile than the other races. So something small like that. And the only other fix I really think it would need is the artillery. Artillery in this is really powerful and can nearly shoot wherever it wants to shoot, and can really wipe out units very, very quickly. And artillery pretty much always makes its points back. So I think reducing how lethal the artillery and the shooting is overall, I really want the artillery and shooting to be more disruptive. You know, making units maybe go disordered, or moving units back out of the battle line formation, as opposed to being a way to totally eliminate and kill people off. So overall, Oathmark, very fun game, really engaging, really good for new people. Plays relatively quickly for a rank and flank game. And hopefully when a second edition comes out, I don't think there needs to be huge, massive changes. Just a little fix to the maneuver system, a little change to the elves, and a bit of a change to the artillery. But I hope this review was useful or interesting to you. It is one of my first videos I've ever made, so please feel free to comment with any constructive criticism. Let me know if there's any other rules which you're interested in having reviewed, and shortly I will have a video up of me playing through Oathmark using 2 small, probably 1,000 point-ish armies, so then you can see the mechanics in place. Thanks.